Good morning. Now let's be very, very serious this morning and look on this as a lesson, a very deep lesson, and not a very easy one. I'd like to start off by reminding you that no one has discovered any easy way to successful living on earth. Not materially, not mentally, or spiritually has anyone yet discovered an easy way to be healthy, happy, wise, and prosperous. It is a difficult way. And if you undertake to mold your life on spiritual lines, you will find that for quite a long while it is a very difficult path because it involves some very hard work. And hard work is the one thing we'd all like to escape. I hope it won't surprise you if I tell you that none of the evils that are on the earth, sin, disease, poverty, man's inhumanity to man, are necessary. Not one of them is rightly here on earth. Every one of them could be wiped off the face of the earth and within a reasonably short length of time, if the world of people were determined that they should be wiped off. But they aren't. It is only as you and I individually come to a place, either through disease, through some form of sin or lack, or other troubles, that we really get desperate enough to say, I'm going to have harmony if I have to work 20 hours a day to get it. And when we get that desperate, we do find it. I know some of you right here that have had to work almost at the edge of the grave to come back. And you've only succeeded through hard work. Now, the reason for these evils on earth is that the experience that was called the fall of man, the experience that came about because of accepting two powers, good and evil, has set up this what we call mesmeric influence or universal mind, which by virtue of our birth becomes our mind, yours and mine. And right from infancy we begin to live a life of both good and evil, and this is the point, we are acted upon. Nothing that we do as humans do we do voluntarily. Nothing. We are acted upon. And we are acted upon without our knowing what is influencing us. When, as children, we have measles and scarlet fever and a few of those other children diseases, parents do not realize that that's an unnecessary experience for their children. They don't have to have it. And in the past 75 years, there are literally thousands of families who have brought up their children without those diseases. But you have to know how, and you have to practice until you are able to overcome the influence that acts upon your household to bring those diseases into your household. In the same way, there are tens of thousands of families in these last 3-4 generations that have brought up their children without moral delinquency or child delinquency, juvenile delinquency in their homes. And I don't mean just accidentally had good children. I mean that through specifically knowing the truth, they kept those influences out of their home that would have brought the same percentage of discord into those homes as is found in other homes. Many, many years ago, I used that term in a class. I said that we are not people, we're statistics. Every home, every 100 homes has so much of disease and so much of sin and so much of accident. We've just become a statistic instead of an individual being. But by these tens of thousands of families who have learned some measure of truth and how to work with it, these world influences have been set aside. And many, many homes have been free of children's diseases and free of juvenile delinquency. Now, they've even gone further. There are tens of thousands of families in the world where, if you were able to check, you would find out that they've gone through periods of as much as 20 years with less disease than the actual family would have in a normal year. They've almost been able to rule disease out of their home, if not entirely, 80% anyhow. It is possible, with what we know today, to rule at least 80% of the world's discords out of our bodies, out of our minds, out of our homes, out of our families. We may not escape 100%, because once in a while our guard is down. But if we escape 80 to 90%, we're doing well, and we're showing forth to the rest of the world what can be done, which eventually will lead to 100%. Now, this isn't accomplished by merely joining the Christian Science Church or Unity or Infinite Way. It isn't accomplished merely by saying I'm a student of one of these metaphysical or spiritual teachings. It's accomplished by working with the principles. And first of all, the principles have to be known by you and by me individually. And that means first study and then practice. And of course, we're not going to be any more perfect in our practice in the beginning than we're going to be perfect in practicing piano or language or anything else that we undertake. It requires study and it requires practice. It requires something more than that. It requires an ability to surmount the theological beliefs with which you may have been brought up. Because you first have to learn that going to church and observing holidays and holy days and feast days and going through rites and rituals and forms of worship and believing in God is not the answer. and does not produce this result. And that's a hard lesson to learn. It's a difficult thing to overcome that belief that there's a God somewhere going to do something if you just can believe hard enough or trust hard enough or have enough faith or are faithful enough in church service or whatnot. It's difficult to overcome these old theological superstitions. God is truth, but ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And it doesn't say the truth shall make you free. It says ye shall know the truth, and then the truth shall make you free. And so the responsibility is on your shoulders. It really amounts to this: whether or not you want this harmony enough to wake up in the morning in time, to put in some time in study and practice, whether or not you want it enough to set aside a period at noon or in the evening and again at night, or possibly when you wake up in the middle of the night, for an active, diligent practice, not merely reading a book. If you only knew how many students in every part of the world actually believe, because they are reading these books, even the Infinite Way books, that that is going to do it for them. It isn't at all any more than if you read books on languages, you're going to learn them. Or if you read books on music, you're going to learn it. The reading of the books is a step leading up to the practice of what you have learned. And believe me, it takes more mental energy than the average person cares to tackle or remain with very long after they've begun it. Now, the ills of this world, and I include every form of them, the diseases, the sins, the poverties, the lack, the unemployment, these come into our experience through two avenues. One is the universal belief, the universal carnal mind, which is continuously hammering at us, unknown to ourselves. And the second is the almost directed malpractice or pressure of other people's thoughts or beliefs around us. When we speak from an absolute standpoint of truth, it is literally true that there is only one power, and that power is Spirit, God. And beside it, there is no other power. And the proof of that is this, that whenever you bring your discords to where that one power is in operation, your discords begin to disappear, proving they weren't power. It is very much like darkness, which may exist, but which instantly disappears and dissolves when the light is introduced. But, and here's the great but, for all metaphysicians and all students on the spiritual path, that darkness is going to remain darkness until the light is introduced. And the carnal mind is going to be a power in the experience of everybody on the face of the earth until it is brought face to face with truth, with the consciousness of truth, with the realization of truth. In other words, even though we, through our practice, can eliminate sin, disease, lack, limitation, and all these discords from our own experiences and sometimes from our own homes, there are still going to be hospitals down the street and mental institutes and cemeteries and prisons. In other words, never doubt for a minute that the carnal mind is power where the truth is not known. It isn't power in the sense that it can maintain itself or sustain itself in the presence of truth, any more than darkness is a power that can maintain itself once light is introduced. But you know that in the absence of light, darkness is there, and I say to you that in the absence of a consciousness of truth, error is there. In any form, in every form, or every possible combination of forms. It is only when the consciousness of truth, the realization of truth, is brought to these erroneous situations that the carnal mind is proved to be the arm of flesh or nothingness. Up till that moment, it operates. You know that. You know that colds, grippe, flu, pneumonia, all of these claims, scarlet fever, measles, whatnot, they operate. They have operated in the experience of most of you as they have in my experience. They operate. You can't close your eyes to that. They're operating in the experience of people all over the world. Your newspapers and your radio tells you that. But the end of them only comes in proportion as these evils of human existence are brought into the light of a consciousness that is illumined with truth. A consciousness that has been dedicated to truth, whether it's my consciousness or yours. For remember this, every one of us has the potentiality of the Christ. Every one of us has full and complete access to that mind which was also in Christ Jesus. None of us are proving that in any too great a degree. But the fact that we are proving it in a measure shows that we can go the full distance, just the same as when automobiles were winning Vanderbilt Cup races at 40 miles an hour. The mere fact that they were going 40 miles an hour was sufficient proof that the day would come when they'd go 80 or 100, and who knows how much more when proper roads are built. And when the Wright brothers flew an airplane for 57 seconds, that was the full and complete demonstration, for it proved to us that eventually there would be no limit in the air. So it is with us. If we, by our developed spiritual consciousness, can see the healing of a headache, a cold, any one of the even minor things, then we know right well that it only is a matter of a degree of developed consciousness until any and every evil in the world will disappear from view. For quite a few years I experimented with this claim of mongoloid babies, and I've had a measure of success. Enough to show that we can have complete success if we sufficiently dedicate our lives to it. Recently, one of our students brought about the healing of a claim that has never in the history of the world been cured by materia medica. And I don't know whether there are any cures on record spiritually, but I do know there are none medically. That is the claim of hemophilia, this bleeding disease. And in this case, a child that up to the age of 6 years had never walked, had never been on its feet. And so out of 6 months was on its feet and in school. Now, it can be done. It can be done. It's a matter of dedication. It's a matter of what extent are we willing to practice with the letter of truth. How many times a day are we willing to practice until we do attain that necessary consciousness? In order to practice, we must first learn what the truth is. And so I want to give you this lesson, that any discord, regardless of its name or nature, is imposed upon this world, upon you and upon me and upon others in this world, by the mesmeric nature of what is called carnal mind or universal belief. By rising in the morning and sitting in contemplative meditation, pondering this idea, we realize the truth is that I and the Father are one. Therefore all that the Father hath is mine. I am constituted of God qualities. Not only I, every individual on the face of the globe. All that God is, I am. The fullness of the Godhead bodily is expressing itself as my individual being. God the Father and God the Son, one. All that prevents my demonstrating this and living this is a mental activity, universal to begin with, personal in expression, but actually a mind force that isn't a power, for it was not created by God. It is not maintained or sustained by God. It was never ordained by God, and therefore has no element of reality, law, substance, cause, or law. Now, this then that the world calls carnal mind, the sum total of these erroneous mind forces, all that is embraced in the word carnal mind, whether in its universal aspect or whether appearing as the mind of individuals, is nevertheless a no mind or no power, an arm of flesh, a nothingness. It has no avenue of expression. It is never person, because God is infinite, and therefore God must be the only infinite person, even if individually appearing 1 billion times or 4 billion. God being infinite in nature, there is no other power, there is no other presence, and that which has been disturbing us individually or collectively is the belief in two powers, the belief that carnal mind is as much power as divine mind, and that divine mind has to in some way destroy mortal mind or carnal mind, and this is not true. Mortal mind or carnal mind need not be destroyed. They must be realized, consciously realized. as no mind, no power, just the arm of flesh, nothingness. Think of this. The infinite way is so clear in its teaching that there are not two powers, that you must bring yourself, and it isn't easy, you must bring yourself to the point of realization, I am not using truth to destroy error, I am knowing the truth that error is not a person, a power, a force, a condition, has no law. Do you see why no one can do this for you? Oh, yes, they can. They can do it for you when you are undergoing an acute period of illness, or lack, or sin, or temptation, or unhappiness. Yes, they can. But then you're set free to go right back into it again, unless you have taken hold of yourself and learned this daily procedure. I have done one chapter of a book on this subject, and I've never done another because I don't believe another is necessary. And that one is protective work in the Infinite Way Letters of 1955. You will find this illustrated there, and perhaps more strongly so in this particular tape, which probably will be a chapter of another Infinite Way book within another year or two. But unless you are willing to come down to a program of this kind, do not think for a moment that you are setting yourself free from the action of carnal mind or mortal mind, mesmeric influence, because it will function in your experience in most unexpected ways until you yourself come to the place of nullifying it by a conscious knowing of the truth. Now, this isn't a lifetime program, because in time, working with this every day, possibly for a year or two, it becomes so much a part of your consciousness that you automatically reflect this in your daily living from morning to next morning and next morning and next morning. In other words, your whole reaction to life is so automatic that this no longer becomes a necessary specific practice, but don't try to rush that period. Now, this daily practice is enough to clear your home of most of the things that disturb your home. We are told that none of these things will come nigh thy dwelling place if you dwell in this truth, if you abide in this word. And therefore, when you awaken in the morning and realize this is the household of God, God is the mother, and God is the father, and God is the son. God is the life of this household. God is the soul of this household. God is the spirit. God is the bread and the wine and the water. God is the meat. God is the very life and the resurrection unto this household. Ah, yes, yes. Yes, the papers and the radio tells us about infection and contagion and tidal waves, and wars and threats of wars, and bad politics. But all of this is embraced in the carnal mind. And the carnal mind isn't a power. The carnal mind is a belief in two powers, that there is a good power and an evil power. And the longer I accept that belief, the longer I am subject unto that belief. And the longer I will have good experiences and bad experiences. But if in this moment of contemplative meditation, I realize that this is the household of God, that we are members of that household, and that God that created maintains and sustains, and beside this God there is no other power, and all that is embraced in this carnal mind as a belief in two powers is but belief, is but appearance, a temptation to believe that this is a human household with human beings in it. I can reject these appearances because of the truth that I know, that God is Father and Mother, and God is also the Son. God the Father, God the Son. I and my Father are one. I dwell, I live and move and have my being in this consciousness of one power, God power. And that all else that is embraced in the term of evil, all that is embraced in the term of temptation, carnal mind, mortal mind, or any other name, is but the arm of flesh, no power. God does not destroy evil powers. I realize that evil powers aren't powers. Now, that practice in your household, in your business, in your art, in your profession, rigidly maintained until it develops in you the actual consciousness of this truth, will change your entire experiences. You can change your whole life in 30 days, depending on the degree of this with which you work. Sometimes it isn't that easy, and it may be a year or 2 years, but it's worth it for the sake of all the remaining years. Now, eventually, you come to an experience of this kind, and this was brought back to my mind yesterday. In 1951, when I was here in the islands, I had an accident, and it was very evident that my small toe was fractured, and in great pain I limped into my hotel room and threw myself on the bed, and there I saw that this toe was off at angles. It was completely broken. And I was in pain, but I knew that I had to rise above that pain, at least for a moment, and I quieted myself, probably pondering some statement of truth, and then finally, seeing that toe out there that way, the thought came to me, can I handle this myself? And instantaneously the answer came back, no, I can't, but I can. I didn't say it. It actually said it within me. I heard it. No, you can't, but I can. And a breath went out of me. I just lie there, and then the click, and that toe snapped right back. The following week I had it x-rayed for my satisfaction, and it indicated it had been a complete break, complete fracture, and it had set itself. Now it was healed. You see, that's what happens now in my treatment work. Very seldom do I have to rehearse this treatment or contemplative meditation as I gave it to you here a couple of times this morning. Very seldom. Once in a while I may have to call some statement or other to conscious remembrance, but most of my work is accomplished because now, after all of these years, and remember we're in the 30th year of this practice, now when I sit back I can automatically get still and listen. And it doesn't take long until that same I comes to the surface again. It reminds me, you can't do anything about it, and you don't have to. I am here. And when that I is on the field, when it consciously announces itself, there's a complete relaxing of Joel. And then it takes over, and the work is done. But some students come to this very quickly. The one who brought about this healing that I told you about today, the whole thing was an instantaneous healing that took place in just a few minutes. And it took place when she was called into this child, and the mother was with the child, and our student realized that there's nothing that we can humanly do in a case like this. Nothing. And there was that complete sense of nothing, and then something came out, and it appeared as a light. The mother said, "Oh, hasn't the sun gotten bright?" No, the sun hadn't gotten bright. The light had appeared. And the child was healed. Now, there is a fourth dimension of life. Don't ever doubt it. There is more to life than what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. That's only the third dimension of life. That's the life of the five senses. But each one of us has a consciousness beyond the five physical senses. But it never comes into human experience as such. It only comes when, through meditation, we are able to get so still that the five senses stop functioning, and this fourth dimensional life or awareness comes into being. Now, when that happens, you are living the life described by Paul. I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. Now you are living the fourth dimensional life in which you do not make decisions. You do not have to take thought for what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed. There is a something. Some few people come to that very quickly because it's close to the surface. The reason it's close to the surface is their past lives. No one ever began their life with birth, just as no one ever ends their life with death. I hope you all know that the experience that we call passing on is just another chapter of life, like infancy and youth, childhood, adulthood, middle age or maturity. So what we call death or passing on is still another chapter. And we go through many such chapters before we are fully evolved. But since that is true, it must also be true that we never had a beginning. Our lives did not begin with birth. We coexist actually with God. In other words, as long as there's been a God, there's been us. Because God does not create today or tomorrow. God's creation began with God. And that is creation. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. In other words, nothing new is being added to the activity of God. Life is not created, it unfolds. Life discloses itself in the visible from the invisible. You could trace that even in the human picture by realizing that before there is such a thing as a male or a female seed, Its life must have existed, or it couldn't have appeared as the form of seed. That seed is only a form which life assumes, but life must have been there, or there couldn't have been a seed. That's true out in this garden. You can't have a garden, you can't have seeds out in this garden unless there's life. Therefore, life must precede form, and your life preceded your form. One day you are going to understand that the secret of all life is in the word consciousness, and that consciousness has never begun and can never end. And therefore, that all life is unfolding consciousness. And it unfolds in states and stages of consciousness. In other words, then, there is a degree of consciousness which we call the savage. There is a degree of, or a state of consciousness that we call the cannibal. There is a degree of consciousness that is totally ignorant of mathematics or language. You know, as you study, you learn strange things. Did you know that until 500 BC there wasn't even an alphabet in the world? When you stop to think of life without an alphabet, you'll begin to see why there aren't books going back beyond 500 BC, why there aren't manuscripts. And then you'll begin to see what life must have been between people who had no alphabet, no writings, nothing but, well, sometimes only figures. That was a state of ignorance, but it was the same infinite consciousness that we have, because out of that state of ignorance or ignorant consciousness, that consciousness evolved to where there was an alphabet, and then it evolved and evolved and evolved to where there were languages and music and art and science and all the rest of these things. So it is that if you watch your own life from the days before you came to a metaphysical or spiritual study, you'll see how your consciousness has evolved, and things that were possible to you as a human being then wouldn't any more be possible to you now than flying without wings. You're a different person. No, you aren't. You're the same person. You're the same consciousness, only more highly evolved. Deepened consciousness, ripened consciousness. But you can't deny that Joel Goldsmith 50 years ago and Joel Goldsmith today is the same Joel Goldsmith. I know it. I recognize my name and my family and everything about it. But the things that were possible then are not possible now. And the vision of today wasn't possible then. The person was the same, and the consciousness was the same, but it has changed, it has ripened, it has evolved, it has deepened, and that's the secret of life. Now, when you know that, you will know why you cannot go to church and pray for anything, or stay home and pray for anything. That is why all the prayers in the world that are aimed at peace on earth are not going to produce peace on earth. Do you know why? There'll be war as long as war is a part of man's consciousness. Until consciousness evolves to the point where it won't war, regardless of what the circumstances may be, there will be wars. In the same way, there will be lawsuits. Until an individual evolves to the place where they won't go to court no matter what the issue is, there will be lawsuits. Once consciousness evolves to that point that a person will not go to court, that will end the days of courts and the needs for courts. But to try to pray to do away with courts while consciousness hasn't been changed, it's impossible. And so it is. When we pray for justice and mercy for certain peoples of the world, we're praying amiss. If we must pray for them, let's pray that they have a change of consciousness. Then we'll find that all of circumstances will be different. And so I say to you, sin, disease, lack, limitation, unhappiness, lonesomeness, every one of those things are going to tackle us, even if we find a practitioner who could remove them all from our experience today. They will return, some of them or all of them, and sometimes with new babies, next year or the year after, unless our consciousness changes. And how do we change that consciousness? Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Once you begin to perceive your true identity, I and my Father are one. God's grace is my sufficiency. I need not fight. I need not battle. I need not sue. I need not war. God's grace is my sufficiency. But having declared that, I must stand fast until I have developed the state of consciousness in which there is no more war, no more battle. Do you know it's the same with the healing of disease? A practitioner does not become a good practitioner until they have worked with so many things, so many times, until they have developed a state of consciousness that does not immediately begin to war with the claim that's presented to them, whether it's one of sin or one of fear or one of lack or one. As long as a practitioner can be made to fight it, that practitioner cannot win. When the practitioner can approach it with, ye need not fight, stand ye still and see the salvation of the Lord, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. When they then develop that state of consciousness, then they're healers. Then they are spiritual healers and not before. So you see, consciousness is the secret. And we can't heal disease. We can't heal the world's troubles. What we can do is develop our consciousness from its cannibalistic state, its ignorant state, its biased, bigoted state, to a new state. You see, if children were taught history correctly, they would come to adulthood with an entirely different consciousness than children come to now. It isn't their fault that they are what they are. It's the result of the consciousness that we give them. I'm just thinking of this in line with a recent event. You probably have read that the legislature of Massachusetts is going to issue a posthumous pardon to two men it electrocuted 32 years ago for murder. Now, the governor of the state and the judge that convicted the man and the jury all knew those two men weren't guilty. And the newspapers knew it. But it's taken 32 years for their consciousness to evolve to the state where they're willing to acknowledge it and issue a pardon. See that? It's a state of consciousness. It wasn't thought wrong for a judge to send two men to the electric chair who were innocent. It was all right. You know why it was all right? They were socialists, so who cares? Well, but today we're all socialists. We've all accepted the very things that they died for. Every one of the things that they stood for as socialists in those days under Norman Thomas is incorporated into law of our land today. So we are all socialists. Our consciousness has changed, and that's what I say. We're the same people, but with different consciousness. If history was correctly taught, so that children would really know what caused wars, it would help them evolve a state of consciousness in which no longer war could take place. I'm finding it all the time that children, even in these days, believe that the Civil War was over slavery. They still believe it. It's still an idealistic thing in their mind, that Civil War. Of course, the new history books that probably for a long time won't be available in schools, but they will be in libraries, will tell them the truth, that it was cotton that the war was fought over, and money and prices. And so it'll be with World War I and World War II. Our consciousness will evolve when we know the truth about things, when we're not kept in ignorance. And so it's going to be that we're going to rule sin, disease, and death out of our consciousness when we know the truth, that they only come into our experience because we have two powers. Because we are fighting a world that can't be fought. When we understand that we are not sinners, we are not responsible for the ills of our flesh, or the diseases, or the sins, or the poverties, that all of this is imposed upon us from without, and we haven't been taught how to meet it. But ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free of those impositions by knowing the nature of them as a mesmeric influence called carnal mind or mortal mind, and then knowing that it isn't a power, and it isn't a power because God never made it. God never ordained it. God never created, maintains, or sustains anything as opposition to itself. And then you rest. And they rested in his word, and the enemy destroyed itself. And so it is in our healing work. Once you stop fighting the error and begin to realize that in the infinity of God all else must be powerless, and rest in this word, rest in it, relax in it, then this I has a chance to come in. This fourth dimensional experience can come in, and that fourth dimensional experience is the light that dispels the darkness. I would like you, first of all, to study that chapter, Protective Work in Infinite Way Letters, 1955, and the chapter, Love Thy Neighbor in Practicing the Presence. Because in this chapter, Love Thy Neighbor, you are going to come face to face with a truth that at first you will want to ignore. Second, it will shock you. And that may lead you to the third point of experimenting. It is not what goes in the mouth that defileth. It's what comes out of the mind, of the consciousness. It isn't anything in this external world that is, or anyone in this external world, that is causing our discords and inharmonies. It is our ignorance of this truth. In other words, if I'm just a blank on the subject of truth, then of course I'm receiving all of these impressions from without and acting upon them and reacting to them. But from the moment that I begin a serious practice of the lesson that we have had here today, now from the moment that I set up a daily practice of a lesson of this kind, I become master of my fate. The truth I know begins to take over. The truth that I'm practicing, the truth that I'm allowing to permeate my consciousness takes over, and then nothing from without enters that defileth or maketh a lie. It is the truth that I'm consciously knowing that is now in control of my life, of my body, of my health, of my business, of my art or profession or whatever my life's work may be. You see that the issues of life can flow out from us and literally return us to the first chapter of Genesis, where we were given dominion over everything on earth and everything in the water and everything in the air and everything in the sky. Now you know that humans at this date do not have dominion. They don't have dominion over germs, and they don't have dominion over accidents, and they don't have dominion over alcohol, or they don't have dominion over drugs, and they don't have dominion over food. They don't even have dominion over the stars. They even give to the stars dominion over their lives. But that is all because of a state of consciousness, an ignorant state of consciousness, a state of consciousness ignorant of truth. The truth is that we were given dominion over our lives, but you can only accept and exercise that dominion by an act of consciousness. You must consciously know the truth, learn the truth, then you must consciously practice the truth, and through the learning and the practice of truth, you develop a consciousness of truth. And then you bring into your experience the deep secret, which is the fourth dimension. Now, only through meditation is the fourth dimensional consciousness brought into action in our lives. The rest of the world walks around without a fourth dimensional consciousness. And therefore, they have to live by bread alone. They have to live by the world of effect. But from the moment that you have learned to meditate and can get into a sense of peace so that you are listening, then all of a sudden this I comes in. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you to the end of the world. I am the resurrection. I will restore the lost years of the locust. I am your bread and your wine and your water. Seek me and be saved, for I am thy life. My presence goes before you to make the crooked places straight. My presence walks with you, beside you, within you. If you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be with you. If you fall into the waters, you will not drown. If there is a fire, the flames will not kindle upon you. I am thy rock, and I am thy fortress. Hide in me. Live and move and have your being in the realization that you do not have to live your life. Christ, I live your life. I will never leave thee. I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. This is the fourth dimensional consciousness speaking. It is not a human being, because you could learn these words and recite them, and they would do you no good. There is an actual fourth dimensional consciousness which comes into expression through meditation. That is why, until this meditation was taught, it wasn't found in the Occidental world. The Orientals knew it. The Orientals have known it. The Orientals, at least some, have been able to bring it into their experience. But very few in the Occidental world, only a few, discovered it. Now, since the 1930s, I have been teaching it all around the world, and many, many students can testify to what has happened in their lives after they touched the center, and that fourth dimensional consciousness came to life and began to talk to them, or go before them as an experience, or enable them merely to rest back in the assurance that it was there. And that's what we're leading to in this work, the full development and bringing forth into expression of the fourth dimensional consciousness. And these other steps, as given in this lesson today, this is the way in which it's done.